Discussions regarding the hard problem of consciousness usually draw a specific boundary. They restrict the mystery to our senses, the raw, subjective experience of seeing the color red, tasting salt, or feeling the cold ocean spray. The puzzle is why the physical processing of light or temperature results in an internal feeling at all. The brain could, in theory, process this data in the dark, without any subjective experience attached to it. But there is a concept that breaks this boundary. It is called cognitive phenomenology. Cognitive phenomenology is the proposition that thinking itself has a distinct, irreducible feeling. There is a specific subjective experience to grasping a meaning, following a logical argument, or suddenly understanding a concept. The materialist framework attempts to quarantine the mystery of consciousness strictly to these basic sensory experiences. In this view, the rest of mental life, reasoning, language, mathematics, is treated as mechanical computation. If cognitive feeling exists, the hard problem expands far beyond perception and into the fabric of rational life. This suggests that a purely computational model of the mind misses the actual experience of understanding. This creates an immediate problem for functionalism, the premise that mental states are entirely defined by their causal roles within a system. Here, a belief is simply whatever physical process plays the belief role in the machine. Materialists defend this by insisting that thought is functional through and through. They argue that any feeling you have while reasoning is merely a sensory byproduct, the sound of your inner speech, a flash of mental imagery, or a subtle emotional tone. This diagram illustrates why that defense fails. Functional role underdetermines phenomenal state. Two systems could share the exact same physical organization and process identical inputs, yet they could differ completely in the phenomenal character of their cognitive states. The functional role of processing a sentence, parsing the syntax, and generating a response remains identical whether the subjective experience of understanding is present or not. Because the mechanical sequence works either way, functional differences cannot map cognitive qualia. Computation alone does not equate to comprehension. We can test this using a variation of a classical thought experiment about total physical knowledge, shifting the focus from color vision to mathematical neuroscience. Imagine a scientist who possesses exhaustive, perfect physical knowledge of how the human brain processes mathematics. She knows every active neural population and connectivity pattern involved in logic, and tracks the exact neurotransmitters that modulate the moment of insight. But she has only ever processed these physical descriptions. She has never actually experienced the act of understanding a mathematical proof herself. What happens when she finally sits down and experiences, for the first time, the logical necessity of why the square root of 2 is irrational? At this moment, she learns a new fact. She learns what it is like to understand. No amount of neuroscientific mapping constitutes the experiential grasp of why a conclusion follows from its premises. The physical description leaves out the experience of understanding. This reopens the explanatory gap in the domain of thought. Physical blueprints leave out the subjective realization that makes the logic click. This leads to intentionality, the question of what makes a thought genuinely about an object rather than just a syntactic process. Computational systems manipulate abstract symbols strictly according to syntactic rules, moving data from one register to another based on shape and sequence. But those symbols lack inherent meaning.
Without a conscious interpreter to grasp what they represent, they are just physical shapes shifting in the dark. The phenomenal constitution thesis addresses this directly. This diagram shows the core of the thesis. Meaning is not merely accompanied by consciousness, but is entirely constituted by it. The felt difference between processing a dictionary definition and actually grasping the concept is exactly what comprehension consists in. If grasping meaning requires cognitive phenomenology, the symbol grounding problem cannot be solved by engineering more complex code. Symbols without phenomenal grounding remain meaningless. If intentionality requires irreducible conscious experience, then meaning itself cannot be reduced to an arrangement of physical matter. The materialist may still argue that cognitive feeling is just sensory imagery, visualizing a shape or hearing an inner voice. Consider aphantasia, a condition where individuals lack all visual mental imagery. People with aphantasia cannot visualize concepts, yet they still reason and experience insights. Their cognitive experience does not depend on a sensory vehicle. We see further evidence in the tip of the tongue state. You know the concept you want to express, its meaning and its semantic neighbors, but the sound of the word is missing. The meaning is phenomenally present even when the sensory form is absent. We also see this in the contrast of hearing a foreign language. The physical auditory input is identical whether you understand the language or not. Identical physical inputs resulting in different phenomenal states proves that understanding contributes its own distinct non-sensory character to our reality. This requirement for consciousness extends to the active mechanics of rule-based logical reasoning. Evidence suggests that while the brain can store information unconsciously, the active manipulation of that data, comparing, combining, and restructuring logic, depends on conscious processing. We experience this in the phenomenal texture of intellectual effort, the specific strain of holding premises together and tracing their implications. There is a categorical difference between being pushed toward a conclusion by habit or bias and the active, felt phenomenal force of being compelled by a valid logical inference. This is the classical argument from reason. Physical causation operates on physical properties like mass and charge, but logical validity, the way a conclusion follows from a premise, is a relation of meaning, not a physical force. Because physical systems only react to physical properties, they are blind to logical necessity. For an inference to be made because it is valid, the mind must be sensitive to the logic itself. This sensitivity is found in the phenomenal grasp, making consciousness the active substrate for rational inference. Materialism faces a problem of self-stultification. By reducing thought to unconscious physical causation, it undermines the rational credentials of the reasoning used to accept it. When a materialist finds their arguments compelling, they are relying on the exact irreducible cognitive phenomenology their theory cannot accommodate. The felt force of evidence and the phenomenal pull of logical connection are missing from their purely physical frameworks. The mathematical simplicity of the materialist model leaves the core of the reasoning process entirely unaccounted for. Consciousness is not an optional experiential gloss. It pervades the entirety of cognitive life, from basic perception to the highest forms of abstract logic. Thought is irreducibly conscious. Reasoning itself remains fundamentally impossible without a phenomenal subjective experience.